Okay, we're on the Fierce the Dead YouTube channel. I'm here with David. Hello, David.
Hi Matt, how you doing?
All right, mate. Yeah, I'm all right. What
Yeah.
are we talk about this week, David?
We're going to talk about King Crimson this week and about our 5 favourite King Crimson records.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I mean, how did you discover Crimson, David?
How did I discover Crimson? Well, as you know, I'm a bit of a progressive rock fan, and
I'm not going to hold it
I'd
against
I know. It's a statement rather than a confession. Um, I'd heard that both Genesis and Yes, who were bands that I was into at the time when I was about sort of 17, 18 years old, they were both influenced by this album called In the Court of the Crimson King,
you. Right.
by King Crimson, which of course was a little bit earlier than Genesis and Yes producing their brands of progressive rock. So I heard it around at a mate's house and loved it, absolutely loved it, because it was full of all that sort of prog grandeur that I'd grown to enjoy in bands like Genesis and Yes. And what happened was, weirdly, was I thought I've got to get my hands on a copy of this record. So I went into the record shop, and the only version they had was a double LP where you had In the Court of the Crimson King and Lark's Tongues in Aspic.
Oh wow, I've never seen that. That's cool.
Yeah, and they were two, as we know, two very different records.
Yeah.
So I listened to In the Court of the Crimson King, thought, great, really enjoying this. Listened to Lark's Tongues and Aspic and thought, what is going on here? But and then after that, I actually fell in love with that record, as we'll be talking about soon. And it just went from there, really. Sort of devoured their stuff after that. What about you?
I think so. I had a guitar teacher who was really into the Man Vision Orchestra, and Bruford, because he's into Alan Holdsworth's guitar playing.
Oh, the jazz rock stuff.
All
Yeah.
the jazz rock stuff. And a friend of mine called Clint, I think I had, he lent me some stuff, and the Kurt Cobain talked about Nirvana in interviews, and he was really into Red, I think, and I remember reading that. And I remember there used to be the sort of band that was always in guitar magazines. If you bought guitar magazines, Fripp would be in there, Robert Fripp, and Ballou would be in there. And there was always that sort of band. You know what I mean? It was always that sort of
So like a players band, basically.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. But I bought Red and In the Court, and I never really got into In the Court because I think it is a really important record. But one of the problems with it is it's been so heavily ripped off that I think it robs it. You know, hearing it in the '90s sort of robbed it of its impact, really. Because
I think the thing about In the Court of the Crimson King is that it's impossible to hear it with innocent ears. You're going to have heard all that other stuff,
exactly.
that was sort of influenced by it and so on.
I mean, at the time, mind blowing, absolutely,
it was massively innovative.
I can imagine hearing it in '69. I mean, it must have been unbelievable. And I mean, it was, context is so important in music, but it must be incredible to see it. But by the time I heard it, it was like, it was all right. I liked it, but I wasn't, oh wow, this is the most amazing thing I've ever heard. But I absolutely loved Red, because Red, I was into Voivod and the Melvins and all the sort of heavy stuff that was around the early '90s, and like Helmet and bands like that. And if you listen to Red, it's got that it's a heavy album. It's properly heavy, and it's heavy in the truest sense. And everything on that record is emotionally resonant. It's a heavy album, but we'll talk about it more, in a minute.
Yes.
But, so that's where I came in the '90s via guitar lessons and Kurt Cobain, basically. So it was I mean, the thing with something like Nirvana was, but they came into the mainstream and people got into like American hardcore, Bad Brains, Black Flag and stuff. But he also talked about Red and a lot of stuff that was outside the mainstream. it was quite revolutionary in the early 90s to, I was, being a metal kid. I mean, and then I think, Crimson are a sort of band that a lot of people always really have a thing, a lot of musicians really love, aren't they?
Yes, and I mean that's the thing about it. It's very difficult, I think, to think about King Crimson as one band because
Hmm.
they have changed so much. I mean, the constant thread for anyone who's watching this who doesn't know anything about King Crimson is the constant thread is Robert Fripp, who's the guitar player in the band and the main composer, and he's the only person who's been in every lineup of the group since the outset. Um, and yeah, he's a very highly regarded guitarist. I know that you admire his playing a great deal, Matt. And in fact,
I,
I think every guitar player I know does.
what I love about Fripp is that he's there's a lot of really good guitarists, but there's not a lot of really good ideas. And Fripp
Yeah,
came up with a lot of really good ideas. And whether it was the loop stuff, whether it was the using different scales in the context of rock, changing the lineup consistently, bringing in new influences all the time, abandoning old ideas, bringing all that stuff. I mean, that's
he
why
even,
I admire him.
he
Really.
even
Yeah,
went to
huge loads of ideas.
he even went to the extent, in order to change his guitar playing, he even went to the extent of changing the standard tuning he uses, um, and inventing a whole new tuning
Yeah,
on a sort of rational basis. But there are a number of different bands in my view, and because Fripp reinvents what he wants to do every time.
it's
Uh,
yeah. He's got what did he say? It's more of it's an idea. It's a way of doing things. Was his quote?
yes,
And
yes,
I think that's a really wonderful thing to you know. One of the problems with most bands is they basically make an album, then they make another album, and then once they've got their sound, basically they make that album over and over again, don't
yes,
they?
yeah. And
And
King Crimson haven't really done that.
no, they haven't really done that, and that's why I've stuck with them for so long, and that's why I've been so interested in it because you know most people will have one really good idea and then they coast off it for the rest of their lives. Whereas Robert Fripp had consistently a lot of good ideas and then and then continued to do them and didn't coast and kept doing new things all the time. So, and that's rare in rock music. That's really
Yeah,
rare.
it is
That's
rare.
not how it's done. So we'll talk about these 5 albums chronologically.
Yeah,
Do you want to? So we'll start with we'll start with probably probably not an obvious point, but the band have been going 4 years at this point, haven't they?
yeah. So the first one that I think we both chose this one as one of our choices was Lark's Tongues and Aspic.
Mm.
And it was, I believe, their fourth studio album. They'd been through a whole bunch of lineup changes. So after In the Court of the Crimson King, they kind of
Oh,
imploded.
fifth one,
Uh,
I think, David.
was it the fifth one?
Fifth
Okay.
one. Yeah. No, sorry.
Yes, it was. Yeah, because you got So you had In the Court of
Islands.
the King, In the Wake of Poseidon, Lizard,
Uh,
Island, and then there was the live album as well, Earthbound,
Earthbound. Yeah.
and then Lark's Tongues and Aspic, and um, they've been through a lot of lineup changes and hadn't really sort of had much stability since that first album was made in 1969. Um, but with this record, they consolidated around around a new core lineup, which was Fripp, John Wetton on bass and vocals, of course, very well regarded both before
Yeah.
and afterwards as a musician, and Bill Bruford, who left Yes to join King Crimson. Um, and then on Lark's Tongues and Aspic, they were also joined by David Cross on violin and mellotron, and a mad percussionist called Jamie Muir, who was more of a performance artist than anything else. And he only actually stuck with them for this one album.
That video of them playing I think it's 72 or 73 with Jamie Muir. I mean, this album came out January 73, so
Yeah,
no, it was recorded in January 73, so it would have been the 68 King Crimson started, didn't they? So
yes,
5 years, I suppose. So
yeah.
yeah, there's that video of them playing this stuff. I mean, can you imagine seeing him in a club playing that? Lark's Tongue and
I've just finished reading.
Absolutely
I've
brilliant.
just finished rereading Sid Smith's book,
It's great, that book.
his biography of King Crimson, and he was talking about it wasn't just the audiences who were surprised; it was the other band members because they'd rehearsed with him, they'd rehearsed with Jamie Muir, and you know that they were aware of what he could do musically, but then they get on stage and there he is in his furs and sort of his blood capsules and his fake blood capsules in his mouth and leaping around and sort of throwing chains in the air and stuff. And Bill Bruford said that on one occasion he'd had his ear sliced off by one of these chains
I
because
think
Jamie Muir got quite carried away.
I'd love to see something. I think because it comes from the improv London. Sort of,
Yeah,
I think Jamie Muir played with like Derek Bailey and Evan Parker and people like that.
he did. Yeah,
So he was from the, that, I mean, that stuff's really free ranging, wild, free improvised, brilliant, exciting music. And, and then to layer that on a semi-song based rock band, obviously they got more and more into improvisation as they went on. And Wetton's bass sound is just phenomenal.
it is incredible.
Amazing bass sound.
One of the
It's
things
brilliant.
that Tony Levin was saying in the book, in Sid's book, is that he has no idea how to emulate that bass sound. And this is Tony Levin we're talking about, who's one of the bass players. He can only deduce that it comes from John Wetton's fingers. It's not something which is dependent on gear at all.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was so powerful, that rhythm section. I mean,
yeah,
incredible rhythm section. And what's that live box set thing, The Great Deceiver?
Yes,
And
that was the tour they did. Sort of, I think it was just after Lark's Tongues or around that, and the sort of starless period, the 4-piece lineup without Jamie.
Because that's got some amazing stuff on it. I mean, there's loads of on the King Crimson website. There's loads of really cool live stuff they did, isn't there? Loads of really the King Crimson are blessed with so many recordings of their stuff that they've basically Robert Fripp's label have cleaned up and released, and much of that material was really, I think in many ways King Crimson are a live thing, aren't they?
Yes, and that lineup was, I think, really, from what people say, at its best in concert.
Yeah, I mean, so Lark's Time. I mean, for me, the best tracks on it are the Last Tongue Aspect Part 1 and Last Tongue Aspect Part 2. I mean, that's especially Part 2.
I was when we saw them at Hackney Empire. Yeah,
no messing about there, is there?
When we saw them at Hackney Empire on their first tour since they went out as a 7-headed monster. Which was the first time that we got to see King Crimson. They opened with Lark's Tongues and Aspic Part 1. I mean, how can you follow that? It was just astonishing, and that's an amazing piece of music. It's almost like modern chamber music to me. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on there. So it starts off with this kind of semi-improvised percussion thing, very, very quiet, and particularly if you listen to the original mix, not so much on the Stephen Wilson remix, but if you listen to the original mix, you've got these little sort of bits of tinkly percussion, almost sort of gamelan type of sounds going
like
on.
the African piano thing, isn't it? Those.
It's like a thumb piano.
It's something like that.
Yeah.
It's one of those.
And then it goes into this kind of sort of violin figure, which is influenced. Although I didn't know it at the time, someone told me this later. I'm nowhere near as impressive as I sound when I say this, which is influenced by Stravinsky and the Rite of Spring.
Yeah, well, that's the Stravinsky thing, isn't it? That bab, bab, bab. Yeah, those stabbing.
It builds into this enormous kind of explosion where the whole band comes in, and you've turned the volume up to hear the percussion sound, and all of a sudden your speakers explode because of the sheer dynamics between those two.
It's a pretty rare quality, really, because I think the only other band I can think from the 70s who have got the same power as the original Mad Vision Orchestra, I think. There's that level of. I mean, obviously it's lots of wonderful music from the 70s, but that intensity of playing plus the sort of harmonic complexity as well. There's a
Yes.
lot of bands that are sort of flash players, and a lot of bands are quite aggressive, but they don't really mix the two. Whereas Mahavishnu and King Crimson seem to have this thing of like their heads were going to explode at any moment. It was phenomenal. Just so exciting. You know what I
And I
mean?
think one of the reasons I like Crimson so much is that they go from that into a couple of really excellent songs. There's Book of Saturday,
Yeah.
which is a nice little almost acoustic type of piece. Although it's not played on acoustic guitar, but
Yeah,
there's no
it's a very
no drum in
it's
it.
a ballady sort of thing.
And then you've got Exiles, which is sort of a classic sort of Crimson style yearning ballad, almost like a prototype for Starless, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah.
Um, and that's just side one. It's
Well, they still do Easy Money live now, don't they? I don't think they
they
might do
do.
Talking Drum as well, but
They do. They've done all those pieces. They haven't done Book of Saturday. They haven't done Book of Saturday or Exiles, but
can't remember.
the whole of side two and Lark's Tongues Part One, I think they've done. It's in their repertoire of the touring band now.
Yeah, I know.
Uh, yeah, and you got as you say, Lark's Tongues Part Two, sort of bookending it at the end of it. Just an amazing piece of music.
And I mean, the other thing, I just Lark's Tongue Part One. There's that violin bit at the end as well, where it goes sort of
Yeah.
that flight takes flights. That what's it? I can't remember. There's a classical piece. I'm not sure if it quotes it or it's got a. I can't remember the classical pieces. I'm sure someone in the comments will tell us.
When they do it live, it's Mel Collins does it on flute.
Oh yeah.
It's very effective.
Yeah, no. Well, I think
Yeah.
there's something. It's you can hear the excitement in the band they've got. You can hear the joy in it. I think it's just brilliant.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
right, are we done with Larks?
I think we are. We'll talk about, because I think at the end maybe if we talk about which ones our absolute favourites are out of them, but that's Larks.
So Starless and Bible Black.
Starless, I think that was the next album, in fact, Starless and Bible Black.
Yeah.
Which was interesting because most of the album was recorded live.
Yeah.
And then cleaned up and overdubbed to actually make the album. But a lot of the backings were recorded live.
I quite like that. I think that's quite a cool way to make an album.
Yeah.
Radiohead, the Bends, some of that was done like that as well.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah. I like the idea of recording like that. I mean, it's quite hard to do because you've got to have really good engineers. You've got to have the, it's the sort of thing you'd have to fluke. But I think Crimson were recording everything at the time, weren't they? So
they were. Although
to get, well, I mean, I'm no expert, but
although I think in the end, most of the stuff on Stars and Bible Black came from one concert in Amsterdam.
Because a lot, actually, that's probably not true. Because there are a lot of, what you're saying is true. But what I was saying, I don't think they recorded every gig, but they had a lot of those gigs on from. Most of them are cleaned up bootlegs, aren't they? So
yes, they are.
But this one was recorded properly, wasn't it? So, and this was kind of, so David Cross was still in it, wasn't he? But Jamie Muir left at this point, hasn't he?
Jamie Muir had left, so he'd gone into a monastery after Lark's Tongues. There's an interesting bit in the Sid's book where they're talking about what happened was where the management, Jamie Muir went to the management, EG, and said to them, I want to leave the band, but I want to talk to the lads to tell them. And EG said, no, don't do that. We'll tell them. And the story that they initially came out with was that he'd broken his leg. So he couldn't tour with them, and the band didn't find out until quite a long time afterwards what had actually happened, and that Jamie Muir had gone off to find himself, and then he'd gone into a monastery for a bit. And Fripp was like, he was like, that's a perfectly valid thing to do because that's a very Robert Fripp sort of thing to do. So he was amazed that the management didn't actually sort of come clean. But yeah, he'd gone by that stage, so they were down to a very well-honed four-piece, with Bruford taking on a lot of those sort of percussion type of duties, in addition to the kit drumming.
So this one, I mean, there's the opening track, The Great Deceiver, which really sounds like the Mahavishnu Orchestra to me. I think it's got a real Mahavishnu. That's got that sort of, that's a very Mahavishnu And I think, you know, I've read an interview where Robert Fripp was talking to John McLaughlin, and he basically said he didn't really listen to the Mahavishnu because he was terrified of being too influenced by them. But he said Bill Bruford was a massive fan, and I think because I think it's got that, the Great Deceiver's got that there's that sort of riff, isn't it?
Yeah.
I love that song. I think that's fantastic. I don't think there's any live versions of Great Deceiver, is there?
I don't know how widely they played it live.
I love that.
It,
I wish they'd
there
do it
might
with the new lineup.
there might be some versions of it in the Great Deceiver box set, possibly. I don't know. I could be wrong. I could be
Yeah,
wrong.
I don't remember hearing it, but I absolutely love that tune. I think it's really, you know, I think it's one of the best things they did. No, so Fracture is the other key
Yeah.
one for me. Because it's one of the most remarkable pieces of guitar playing I've ever heard. I remember when I first met Carvis, we were both talking about that riff from Fracture, and he, you know, I think he'd worked out how to play quite a bit of it. Carvis can do it, I can't do it.
No. It's all
And
those 30-second notes.
it's
Bits
bonkers,
of,
yeah. I mean, but I think when they did, you know, the recent, well, you know, the last 5 years worth of Crimson shows, I think Robert Fripp did try. They did try and do it at some dates, but
they
didn't
did.
really. But he said it's insanely hard, and it is insanely. I mean, it's bonkers hard piece of music.
They revisited the idea on a track on the Construction of Light called
But
Fracture.
yeah, that's a good one.
Um, it's very similar, actually.
Mm.
But you just get the impression as you're listening to it, you're waiting for it to all fall to pieces because it is just so relentless in the pace of the fast sort of cross picking that he does in that.
It's insane.
Astonishing.
It's,
Yeah.
it's insane. It's you know, and this one as well. It's got quite a similar format to the previous one, and it's got the two big riff songs at the beginning and end, doesn't it? A couple of improv pieces and some more lyrical numbers, aren't there?
Yeah, I mean the song on that one is The Night Watch, which is a really nice little song.
Mm.
Really good guitar solo in it.
Yeah.
From Fripp. And there's also an improv called Trio, which is remarkable in that it's Fripp on Mellotron flutes, David Cross on violin, and John Wetton on bass. And Bill Bruford apparently during it was an improvised piece. He sat there with his drumstick sort of across his chest like this, and he's credited as being a co-composer because he chose not to play, and that was what made the piece.
Silence by Bill Bruford.
I think it was on the Young Person's Guide to Crimson when they put the credits in for it. They put him down as Bill Bruford, admirable restraint.
Brilliant. I mean,
but that's a really fantastic little sort of improv piece.
I think at this point, I'd just like to say that Sid Smith's book, King Crimson's book, is one of my favourite books about music ever written. And Sid's a diamond, such a wonderful guy.
Lovely man.
He's a lovely man, and he's also a hugely talented writer. The real deal writing about music. He's really so, and it's very rare you come across somebody. I'd love him to write a Mahavishnu book actually, but Sid's a great guy, and I'd hugely recommend his book. And it's written with respect to King Crimson. You know, you're never going to hear me and David say a word disrespectful to them. I mean, might get the odd thing wrong, but they're bound with hugely respect. And I think, you know, the way Sid will not get anything wrong because he knows his stuff. And
he won't. And what's nice about the book is it's not a hagiography. It doesn't put King Crimson up on a pedestal and say these kind of saints. If something's happened, he talks about the difficult times that they've had. They, as all bands do, they have had difficult moments during their past, and he doesn't shy away from any of that.
He's got a lot of integrity.
He has, absolutely. It's a really great book.
So are we done with Starless and Bible Black?
I think so. I mean, it's interesting because you chose that one, and I kind of agreed.
What was the other one you were talking about, David?
Well, funny enough, the Construction of Light is the other one that I really like, which we're not going to talk about apart from now.
we can briefly touch on it if you want.
A lot of people don't like the Construction of Light. They think it's not that great. Now, I know also from Sid's book that it's not the band, one of the band's favourites. But I think it's a great record. I just really like the songs and the compositions on there. For the reissue of it in last year's Heaven and Earth box set, they got the multi-track masters back, and they couldn't use the drum parts, or the drum parts were missing because they were sequenced. It was all done using V drums. So Pat Mastelotto re-recorded the whole drum track for that album, and it's actually improved for it. So it's really, I was listening to it the other day, in fact.
Does he use a real kit or the triggered kit?
Yes, he's using a mixture of the two.
Right.
So you've got some real drums, and then you've got the electronic stuff as well. So and it is improved for it, and of course it gets the remix as well, which also helps.
Yeah, no, I'd like to. I'll have to revisit that. I mean, I don't want to say anything because I just haven't heard it for a long time.
Yeah,
I remember I've got it on CD upstairs. I mean, I liked it when it came out. It's got that quite bluesy one at the start, hasn't it? It's like a blues in odd times.
Prozac blues with Adrian Blue's voice kind of downtuned.
Yeah,
yeah.
It's got like it's like a blues, but there's like, I think it's a bit where it misses a beat off or something. It's like
yeah.
We're the only bad news said we're the only band that can play a 13-bar boogie.
Like exactly like a twisted blues.
It's slightly wrong.
Back to Starless, that was one which I think you were.
Yeah, and I think the reason for me is Fracture, basically. That is the and the Great Deceiver. Those two were the big tracks for me from that one.
Yeah,
and also, like I say, when I was a kid, a friend of mine lent me the Great Deceiver box set. The live improv one. And I listened to that quite a bit as well. And that's a heavy listen. That is.
It is. There's a lot of it.
Really jamming as well. Really like that rhythm section. Bruford and Wetton was just unbelievable rhythm section. Yeah. And I can see why, as a soloist, it's an inspiring thing to solo over that. But also it's quite intimidating as well, and quite you either go with it or you don't. There's no, it's when you've got those sort of really powerful drummers and bass players. I mean, Stuart, our drummer, is quite quite imposing drummer as well, and you have to go with it. You can't. You're not solo. You're improvising as a quartet. There's no one really soloing. They're all playing together, aren't they?
They are, and in fact, it was the power of that rhythm section, which is one of the reasons that David Cross gave for leaving the band after Stardust and Bible Black. Which was that he was finding it very difficult to be heard over the top of that Bruford and Wetton rhythm section.
Can you imagine as a violinist trying to pitch yourself as well? It must be so hard to get the pitches right if you can't even hear what you're playing.
Exactly.
So
when we get to Red, which is the next album we're going to talk about, they were a three-piece, albeit supplemented by guest players.
Yeah, so Mel Collins is on this one, isn't he?
Ian McDonald.
Mel
as well. And it's they sort of brought people back from the past to guest on it. But it was essentially sort of recorded as a three-piece.
And then with overdubs.
Yeah, with overdubs where appropriate.
So this is my favourite King Crimson album, although the next three, I mean, it kind of alternates between those next three, to be honest, because the next three we're going to talk about are my three favourite King Crimson albums.
This one and the following two, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Red, that is probably my favourite rock instrumental is Red, and that's opens the album, and it's like, it's use of the whole tone scale. We don't hear a lot of that in rock music. You don't hear a lot of the bit done with that really powerful rhythm section, and it sounds like Voivod 15 years early. It sounds like Sonic Youth. I mean, it's got nothing. There's nothing of symphonic rock music in there at all, is there?
No, I think basically it's proto metal. Proto, it's a type of metal.
Yeah, proto avant-garde metal. It's not. It's not like. I mean, you wouldn't get Sabbath, and Sabbath wouldn't be able to play. Those parts. It's an incredibly complex piece of music.
They're more of a blues band, really, aren't they?
But yeah, I mean, it was definitely it was so far ahead of its time. I mean, it was just, and the way they progressed from, you know, the stuff they were doing on the first album to what they were doing on Red, it just, you know, bands take 5 years between an album. That's Crimson's entire career.
And of course, by the time they released the album, they'd split up.
Yeah.
He'd basically said, "That's it, no more Crimson," and he went off to go and do his own sort of personal development thing, Fripp.
Um,
Yeah.
So yeah, so start. I mean, this one, every track's a winner, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, but it's bookended by Red and by Starless at the end of it, which is John Wetton's sort of ballad at the start of that, finishing with that
I,
tumultuous instrumental.
I think Fallen Angel's a great tune as well.
Yeah, that's really good.
One More Red Nightmare, that riff on that, down, 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 down.
And that's in their current repertoire, isn't it? One More Red Nightmare.
They great tune.
Peddled that out recently.
There's an atmosphere to Providence, and then I think Starless of progressive, what is classed as traditional progressive music. I'd say Starless is the absolute, you know, that's as good as it gets.
It's one of those songs which you have to sort of highlight as being just really important in progressive music. And seeing that played live by King Crimson was a bit of a moment.
Amazing.
We all had something in our eye, didn't we?
Yeah. So I mean, the way they did it as well. I mean, they did it with they just had one red light. If I don't want to spoil it, if you haven't seen them, but you're not going to see them this year, are you? But if you see they just have one red light, and the whole stage show just goes down to this one red light, and it builds back up during that epic section. And you know, one of my favourite things ever is when that melody comes back in at the end.
Yes.
You know, and then hairs on my arm just thinking about it.
It's an amazing piece of music. And it was one which they'd actually had in the live set for quite some time before they recorded the Red album.
There's that,
like a lot of those pieces, it was developed in concert.
On the album, there's a live, on the recent reissue, there's a live version, isn't there? And I think I actually prefer the live version, because there's a bit at the end where Bruford just did it, really going from the cymbal, and then Robert Fripp plays that melody part at the top. And it's just one of my favourite moments in rock music ever. Yeah. There's just something about it when that melody comes back in, and then the bass comes back in to finish the song off, and it's just bloody hell. You imagine being there? They were just, you know, there's all guest performances on there as well, because Ian McDonald's back from the '69 lineup, playing sax, and I think there's some cornet on there and stuff like that. Yeah. Extra tonal colours on the studio version. But yeah, live, incredibly powerful. It's pretty special, that. I mean, you know, I think I think if I was going to, you know, one 70s band album that's classed as progressive music or progressive rock or whatever, that would be the one for me from the 70s. That's the favourite. The album. Yeah. It's just bloody hell. And then and I love the thing they just went, yeah, we're not doing it anymore now.
Yeah, well, although this is something else that was in Sid's book, which is Fripp had said, well, Crimson's done now, it's finished forever, bye. But there was a moment where it was suggested, and apparently he supported this idea, that he would leave and Ian McDonald would rejoin the band. So you'd have a trio of Ian McDonald on sax and keys, John Wetton and Bill Bruford, but it was not to be.
That would have been cool, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would have been interesting.
Well, you know, sometimes bands can carry on without. I mean, you look at Gong's various lineups.
Yeah.
You know, I think you'd have to say Gong is an idea. Fundamentally, It's an idea, and you know, King Crimson is an idea. I mean,
Fairport Convention's the one I always think of, because they've had so many lineup changes, and lots of iconic musicians have passed their way through it. You know, Sandy Denny, their vocalist, and Richard Thompson, Dave Swarbrick, who've all sort of come and gone. But the idea of Fairport is still there.
You can't fault uh, Robert Fripp's integrity at that point. Just going, well, I mean, they were at the point where they were going to be massive with that album, and they're just like, that's me done. No, put
I
the
think
art first, isn't it?
John Wetton thought that they could then progress to a sort of a different level. They could become the new Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to speculate on what might have been, but of course that was not the way it turned out.
So after this, basically Robert Fripp went off, found spiritual sort of sustenance, and then worked with Peter Gabriel.
Yeah.
And David Bowie, Eno, lots of interesting sessions. He went to New York.
Daryl Hall.
Yeah, that's a great record. That is.
Yeah, Sacred Sounds, very good record.
I haven't heard that for ages. It's brilliant.
It's an interesting record.
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, I think and Exposure, his solo album, is fantastic.
That's tremendous. Yeah.
And then he played with Talking Heads. So he was over in New York. I mean, what a remarkable career the guy's had. Just brilliant. So after that, he's in New York, gets the idea to reform Crimson, but it wasn't originally going to be called Crimson, was it? It was going to be called
Discipline to start with, which of course was the name of the album. But yeah, it was it sort of morphed into King Crimson during rehearsals. In fact, they played a gig or two as Discipline before they adopted the name.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, it was the idea of the sort of gamelan guitars. They got managed to get. I think originally they tried rehearsing with Jeff Berlin, didn't they? And then they got Tony Levin in, who's one of the most remarkable bass players. Just Tony Levin. Isn't it?
According to Sid's book again, it was that the moment he walked in to the studio, it was like, right, you've got the job.
I mean, I have to say, we did a gig with the Stickmen, didn't we? So, and meeting Tony Levin and Pat as well. It's just the nicest guys, just lovely people, and it just makes you realise when those guys, they haven't got a massive ego, but they don't need to because they're the best, don't they? They're the real deal. You don't need to show off and pretend. They're just nice men, and it just shows you.
And then the wild card with that lineup was Adrian Belew, sort of completely new idea, having a second guitar player in King Crimson, which no one hadn't done that before, because it was a second guitar player in the same band as Robert Fripp. But actually, it worked so well.
So they abandoned the entire repertoire apart from Red, didn't they?
They did Red, and they sometimes did Larkstone's parts too.
And that was it, basically. So
that was it.
But you imagine being a Crimson fan at the time, and Elephant Talk comes out.
Yeah,
must have been a hell of a shock.
Yeah,
I mean, there's the level of virtuosity in playing is probably even greater than the 70s lineup, and the discipline, to use the word, is incredible, and the way they're locking on those grooves is just
the way the guitars work together is
remarkable,
bewildering. I mean, the track that sort of epitomizes that for me is Frame by Frame, which is you don't know what the hell's going on there. Then you think how that must have involved a lot of studio trickery, but no, they essentially played it live in the studio, and when you hear the live concerts, it was pretty much there.
It sounds like basically he said, I mean, I've worked out stroke stolen how to do that. The end frame. Basically, you have one guitar going in one time signature, one going in another time signature.
Yeah.
Eventually, they meet up every so many bars. Yeah. It's bizarre though, because if you listen to all the math rock bands and all those bands that play Art Tangent every year, half of them sound like King Crimson's early '80s stuff. I mean,
I'm sure that's no accident.
I mean, all those everybody in that scene loves King Crimson. Yeah. Everybody in that, every band you speak to. Every post-rock, math rock band, there'll be someone who's a bit of a Crimson nerd in there. And they're the only sort of progressive band that, they've reconnected. I think one of the great things about them, they've connected with sort of future generations of younger people in a way that a lot of those bands haven't. And I think they've had a lot more influence and they've sold records, you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
in terms of influence, they're probably one of the most influential bands of the 70s because, you know, so many guitar nerds really love it and musicians really love that sound, don't they? There's
What,
something
what
about
what's interesting about Discipline is that it was the first of 3 albums which that lineup made, and although they were only together for sort of 2 or 3 years, that was kind of unprecedented for King Crimson to have 3 albums made by the same lineup of the band.
yeah.
That just hadn't happened before, not with exactly the same lineup. But of the three, I think Discipline sort of is my favourite.
Yeah.
It's not for me to say which one's the best, but it's the
They've
one
all got their moments, haven't they?
they've all got good tracks on them. Beat and Three of a Perfect Pair have both got some good songs on them.
I think my favourite thing that lineup ever did is the Absent Lovers live album.
Yes, that's a brilliant record.
Bloody
Yeah.
hell. I
That is a
mean,
brilliant record.
just but once again, so that's another band with the same name doing some of the same repertoire. That's like one of the best bands of the early 80s, which is insane. Just to be able to go from having, you know, one of the best bands of the 70s to having one of the best bands of the 80s. It's just like, you know, yeah. Absolute Lovers is for a lot. I mean, it's a live album, and you can't really, you know, but it's just incredible record.
I got a little while ago. I actually got my hands on. Have I got it handy? I don't think I have. The On and Off the Road box set, which has got a lot of it's got those 3 albums plus Absent Lovers plus some other sort of live stuff in it.
Cool.
And a lot of the different takes from that are really interesting. There's even a sort of bootleg quality recording of their first gig as Discipline at Mole's Club in Bath.
You imagine seeing that in a tiny little. But I bet the audience was just like, "Yes, have it."
I wonder what the hell was going on, probably half the time. But
it's I suppose it's one of those things because the vocabulary may have been so new that it was an element of a shock there. You know what I mean? It's like because it was completely. I mean, yeah, you can see a link from Talking Heads to the work that Blue and Frit were doing with Talking Heads, but you can also, you know, there's it's very, very original stuff.
Oh yeah,
and there's bands have taken small elements, you know, like those frame by frame guitars. There's a lot of math rock bands have taken that. Primus kind of took the bass sound, the Tony Levin's bass thing. That's Primus. That's Primus. And, you know,
that is Les Claypool. Yeah.
And I've seen, you know, Primus covering that song or Les Claypool. So there's that sound. It was so influential. And, you know, yeah, obviously there's, you know, they were of their time, and you know, there's that minimalist thing, and, you know, New York, and, you know, but ultimately, it was a phenomenally original sound, and, you know, those 3 records all still stand up, and you know, I think to have a second run that's as good as, you know, it wasn't really a second run because they'd done stuff, but another run in the 80s that was as good, if not better, than the stuff in the 70s is just incredible. Yeah. It's just that doesn't happen.
It's an astonishing thing, and it was this reinvention thing again. It was still Crimson somehow, but it was different, and it was
One thing I think we've learned, I mean, you know, one lesson for bands and stuff is that instead of trying to recreate the past, instead of trying to do what you did in the 70s, you're better off just going, no, let's do something else. Let's do something. Let's be brave here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's the key sort of takeaway from that, isn't it? That you can't go back and repeat what you did before. You've got to be brave and
be bold. Yeah.
And I think that's how you progress. That's how I mean, because he could have got a band together or even reform the original band, because I mean, I think there was talk of some of the original lineup wanting to reform, didn't they? And wasn't there that other, what was the 21st
Century Schizoid band? That was a bit later. That was sort of in the early 2000s.
Right, right.
which was that was Jacko, of course. He was Robert Fripp and Greg Lake in that band. He was guitarist and vocalist.
Phenomenal.
But the first lineup of that had both the Giles brothers in it, Ian MacDonald and Mel Collins, and it was a bit of a monster. And then Mike Giles left and was replaced by Ian Wallace, who was another Crimson drummer back from the sort of the Islands days.
Have you heard you've heard the Crimson Jazz Quartet stuff?
Yes, that's
Brilliant.
really interesting.
Ah, brilliant. Ian Wallace is a great drummer.
He's a fantastic drummer.
Really, one of those guys you can hear that he's listening and he's playing off.
Sadly, no longer with us, but
yeah, really sad. What a brilliant guy. You know what I mean? Heartbreaking, isn't it?
So yeah, Discipline. Of those 380s albums, I think that's my favourite.
Yeah, it's the most consistent, isn't it? But do you remember it coming out, David?
I do. I was at university, and it was the first album that came out that I bought contemporaneously with it coming out by Crimson. The others I sort of caught up with because Red was 74, 75?
74.
Yeah, I was kind of just too young really to sort of be into the music at the time. So Discipline was the first. I was at university. I can remember crowding into the TV room in the hall of residence I was living in at Nottingham University to watch King Crimson on the telly doing Discipline.
Wow.
A concert, which I think that video is actually in the box set as well. I can remember crowding in with a bunch of other people to watch that. That was in the days when students were into King Crimson.
And at the time, was it what the hell is this? That's all gone wrong, or was it well received? Or
well, amongst the people that I knew, we all loved it. We all thought it was fantastic. I was a good friend of mine, a bloke called Roger Sampson, was a guitarist, and he was a huge Fripp fan, and you would hear Fripp riffs coming out of Roger's room all hours of day and night. In fact, I think it used to annoy people immensely. But he was big into that, and the sort of the discipline era stuff was particularly his thing. So yeah, I remember that very well.
I mean, I didn't hear it until after Thrack. So, you know, I worked my way backwards. I heard Red, then Thrack, then I got Discipline. And when I first heard Discipline, I didn't get it at all. I couldn't understand. I didn't understand it. But then I got really into it and I was obsessed.
Yeah.
I was just
once you find it, you find it. Yeah.
I think, you know, Frame by Frame was the way in for me. Once I realised what they were doing with the guitars and how clever it was, I was just like, oh my God, this is, you know, this is incredible. And it's not the most obvious sort of thing, but once you get into it, it's I mean, I can see, I've always been very wary of learning how to play King Crimson songs because I don't want to, I know how the mechanics of them work. I know the scales they're based on. I know how it all works, but I don't want to become a Fripp copyist because there's a lot of them and you're never going to be as good because that was his idea. But you can be the best you, but you're never going to be the best Robert Fripp because Robert Fripp's already got that and you're never going to be as good as him at that. And there's too many people traveling in these shoes, you know.
So after the 80s albums, another break from Crimsoning, and then it was followed by the fifth album on our list, which has been mentioned a couple of times already, which was Thrack. And again, a whole different idea. So you've got all four members of the previous lineup, but then you add another bass player and another drummer.
Brilliant.
Into what Robert Fripp described as a double trio configuration. And in fact, that's the way the album works. You've got in the left channel, you've got one trio.
Brilliant.
And in the right channel of the stereo, you've got the other one.
Absolutely brilliant.
Bonkers. It's a crazy record, but I absolutely love it.
Oh, I love it. I actually re-listened to we said we talk about these 5 records, and I re-listened to them over the last few days, And
Yes,
I actually have to say, I think previously I said Red was my favourite, but I think Thrak may be my favourite King Crimson album because um, it's just got everything that's great about Crimson in it. It's got really good tunes. It's got amazing playing. It's got some sounds on there that are, this is an album that's coming up to being 25 years old.
yeah,
It still sounds really modern. There's guitar
does sound
sounds on there that could be off a math rock record that was released last week. But it's done with such grace and it's classy. It's
yeah.
it's mature but without being boring. Because mature often means they're just too old to do it, but that's not the case for this. If anything, they've got incredible amounts of energy. I mean, it's just
Of all of
unbelievable.
the albums we've talked about tonight, this is the one which, to my ears, has been really innovated by being mixed in surround sound.
Mm,
Um, in fact, when we can do these sorts of things, you need to come around and listen to it
mm.
quite well
Yeah,
because
talk
it's
about
amazing. Um, they've changed the way the whole sound field works quite subtly, but it works extremely well. But yeah, that is an amazing record. The right from the start of it, with Vroom, which just sort of smacks you over the head.
just brilliant, isn't it?
It
Just,
is.
I mean, it's like Red but better, Red but bigger. Just
Yeah, yeah.
brilliant,
It's
absolutely brilliant.
more of everything,
Just
including
fantastic.
including two drummers. I mean, we didn't know then they were going to go to three drummers at some point, but
And
yeah,
we should say Pat Mastelotto, what a drummer! Woof. Just phenomenal. And him and Bruford together playing off each other was just
yeah,
two
just
of the
amazing.
best drummers. Oh, just brilliant musicians, all of them. Trey Gunn's here. Trey Gunn's a remarkable musician as well. Where were we? What was I saying? Lost
We
me
were
train.
talking about
Thrack,
Pat
yeah.
Lotto,
No, Pat
and
Mastelotto, yeah, and Tony Levin. So really, really cool. Dinosaur is I mean, this is the first time they've been it was really quite beatly, isn't it?
yes, it is. That's a weird song because in the middle of it you've got this little kind of string quartet going on,
Brilliant. But
which
I got
that's Adrian Blue apparently. He wrote that,
love
and
that
sort of
song.
put it in the middle. Yeah,
I mean, I think that's Dinosaur is just. I wish I could write one like that because it's kind of like a modern Eye and the Walrus, isn't it?
it is.
Got that sort
With
of, but with this, I mean, there's nothing like it, is there? Really,
no,
you can't really say there's a comparable. Because one of my things about contemporary progressive music is so much of it's so sort of looking back at the past,
yeah,
whereas this isn't that. I mean, what they've done, they've taken things from the past. So they've taken elements of Red, elements of the Beatles, and gone, well, we're not going to do it like that again. We'll just do it a different way, and we'll do it. We'll innovate rather than do the same thing
yeah,
again. I
and
love
with two
that.
bass
I
players
absolutely
and
love
two
it. Two
drummers.
drummers, two bass players, mad guitar synths everywhere. I mean,
Yeah,
so it's very clever because they've got. I think the first thing on the album is a Mellotron, isn't it?
yes, and it is
Uh,
the original 1969 Mellotron that they used on In the Court of the Crimson King.
So and I think I would imagine the old prog fan sticks it on and think, oh, bloody, we're back, and then brilliant, and
All hell breaks loose in your ear.
I mean,
Yeah,
it sounds like this Sonic Youth, Voivod. It sounds. I mean, I remember there's an issue of Guitar for the Practicing Musician magazine came out, and this is around the time I discovered Crimson, and they had a story that was like the innovators, and there's interviews with King Crimson, Helmet, and Sonic Youth, and I always thought King Crimson were within with that lot. I always thought they were like this weird,
yeah.
noisy guitar band, and then it's only later on that people sort of say, "Oh no, they're just 70s prog band." I was like, "Well, I thought they were like Sonic Youth. I thought they were like this noisy guitar band."
That's that
And
whole reinvention thing again, isn't it?
but this,
They,
I
they,
mean,
they
it's
they reinvented themselves again for the 90s.
but and as they've continued to do, and
Yes.
they've never done the same thing again. So, Walking on the Air is one of my favourite Crimson ballads.
Yeah.
Um, People's got he returned to that sort of more the 80s sound.
Yeah,
Um,
quite funky.
Inner Garden's quite Abbey Road era Beatles. Um, Sex, Sleep, Eat, Dreams once again has got that sort of funky sort of thing.
That's the
Uh,
one. That's the one that the band thought was the most successful song on the
it's
album.
great.
Interestingly, yeah.
And then Vroom, it's got a real sense of it brings you back to where it started again.
Yes,
The Vroom
back to
thing
that
at the end. I mean,
crazy stuff.
if I think that's one of the best albums of the '90s. For me, the best records of the '90s: Thrack by King Crimson, Radiohead, OK Computer, DJ Shadow Introducing. You know, there's some really great records. You know, second Supergrass album. You know, there's lots of really good records around that time, Mogwai stuff, and but I think King Crimson's records definitely hold up amongst all that stuff.
Yeah,
They were like, and these guys were like, you know, 20 years older than those bands, but they were still
yes,
doing stuff that was credible and as good. You know, it wasn't like, you know, a lot of time when you really like a band, you desperately trying to, you know, trying
but
to
just
like it, but it's not the
just the
case. It's
fact that
brilliant.
not long after Thrack, it was sort of a little bit later on when they were down to a four-piece, but they went on tour with Tool.
Yeah,
The fact that they could do that when
great, isn't it?
Rip was into what he was calling nuevo metal,
Yeah.
with the Power to Believe. Um,
Well, the Power to Believe is a properly heavy record, isn't it?
it is incredibly heavy.
I mean, that's the 2000 stuff. They went sort of um, industrial metal, didn't they?
They did.
They've just
Um,
and on some of those improvised bits, drum and bass, and they couldn't have been
yeah,
more cutting edge, really, could they?
because they did that. They did that thing. This was sort of after Thrack, um, where they divided up. They called it fractalization, and they
Mm,
divided up into little projects, and you had sort of three or four of them playing together in different configurations, in what Fripp described as research and development.
brilliant, absolutely
And
brilliant.
there's loads of those in they're in the Heaven and Earth box set.
Mm,
In fact, they've put all of them in there. There's a Blu-ray with sort of everything that Project Two ever did, for
mm.
example, which is like sort of a whole range of concerts that they played, um, and you can sort of hear elements of that, which sort of later feed um, into other stuff that was done a bit later on.
But
Um,
I think one of the things that a lot of the sort of progressive bands around now is they think they're copying Crimson by getting out a Mellotron, and you know, it's almost like medieval band reenactment, isn't it? Whereas King Crimson was always about moving forward,
yeah,
always about, you know, if you want to take the ethos of King Crimson, just get the latest gear and just be really brave. And if it's rubbish, it's rubbish. But at least you've had a go.
do what
Whereas,
you want.
you know,
Yeah,
and there's so much. It's very bizarre that, you know, the leading band out of a scene that's so conservative in many ways is, you know, it's a band that's 1 minute they're Sonic Youth, 1 minute they're Talking Heads, 1 minute they're the Mad Vision Orchestra. It's just this morphing genius idea, but they were never like Sonic Youth, the Mad Vision Orchestra, or Talking Heads, but they existed in their own world. It was just remarkable that they.
what I think is interesting is that the albums that we've chosen, um, they're not quite consecutive, but they are sort of condensed in that we
Mm,
went from Darkstone, Stars by Black, Red, Discipline. Those four were consecutive, and then Thrack, which sort of came after the Discipline lineup had kind of sort of morphed into this double trio configuration. But those are all very much sort of they're very much part of that more experimental look than the earlier albums, the sort of in the Court the Crimson King through to Islands, all of which I really like actually, but they are more what I would call progressive rock, like the
mm.
sort of the old side of progressive rock. Um, Although even then they've got moments. I mean, all you have to do is listen to the Devil's Triangle on In the
Yeah,
Wake of
that's
Poseidon,
brilliant.
which is that's the reworking of Holst's Mars.
I think, you know, I think I'd be quick to say that everything they've ever done has interesting things, and it's just personal preference. It'd be, you know, those early records. They've all got interesting moments, and I think, like we said before, perhaps the impact has been slightly lost by how much it's been ripped off.
Yeah,
But they're still wonderful pieces of music. And I'm not being disrespectful to the early stuff in any way at all. I mean, all those records I can listen to and get a lot out of. So I mean, and also the later stuff as well. The stuff in the 2000s and the live material that's come out recently. It's all got interesting stuff on it. It's all got,
Well, that's where it's got, and one of the things I wanted to sort of mention was, we've both seen Crimson since they reformed, and Fripp pulled together this remarkable sort of 7 or 8 piece band, depending upon which version of it you saw. And they're still active. Yeah, presumably once they're able to do gigs again, they'll be back in harness. But for the first time, he's drawn material from the entire King Crimson repertoire, right from, if you go to the concert, you'll see them do Epitaph, you'll see them doing the Court of the Crimson King, you'll see them do 21st Century Schizoid Man, right through to Level 5.
Vroom.
Yeah, and then also some new material which they've written on the road effectively.
Yeah, that's really sort of complex rhythm. I mean, the stuff they're doing now is this sort of complex, multiple times into drum stuff with interlocking guitars and then a sort of floaty flutes over the top of it. It's really,
Flutes, yeah,
really bizarre, brilliant stuff.
Keyboards as well. The fact that Bill Riflin, God bless him,
he was brilliant. Bill Riflin, what a musician!
Jeremy Stacey, who's replaced him, also plays keys.
Jeremy Stacey's phenomenal drummer. I've seen them both lineups, and
yes.
they're both really special. All 3 drummers, all brilliant, and very sad about Bill Riflin. John Wetton as well, obviously we lost as well, and what a remarkable guy as well. So, but yeah, the current lineup are just. I mean,
I have to confess to a certain amount of sort of consternation at it, to be honest, because I've seen them 3 times now, and I've enjoyed them every time. But I can't help but think that some of that kind of experimental spirit is kind of missing.
Well, it was a shock, wasn't it? For me, when I got into Crimson, it was Thrack was the current album, and it was just like, well, they're never going to play the old stuff ever again. So you'd never expect to go and see Crimson and hear Starless, or you might hear Red, you might hear Frame by Frame, but you knew the focus would be on the new material. There might be 1 or 2 old songs, but literally 1 or 2, and I actually loved that. I thought that was brilliant. So in many ways, when they started playing, you looked at the set list for the upcoming, when with the Jacko lineup, and you looked at the set list, like, this is really weird.
It is weird.
And it's because they've never done nostalgia before. It's never been about that. But they're playing old material in a new way, aren't they? With the drums and they've reinvented it and stuff. So I'll be interested to see the next move they make.
Yes.
Because the good thing about them is you never know what you're going to get. And I really hope I don't know what I'm going to get. I hope they're just going to go, you know what, we're going to release an album of all this stuff we've been playing live, and it's going to be this bizarre 3-drum symphony or whatever with this Philip Glass floaty thing over the top, and it's going to be brilliant. And
I get the impression that they're not, that he's, it's down to Fripp to an extent again, isn't it? But I get the impression they're not really massively into the idea of doing another studio record.
No, it might be one of those things where they release the new material. I mean, they've released some of the new material in the live albums, haven't they?
They've done lots of live albums.
So some of the live albums have got bits and bobs of new material in, haven't they? So, it's all really interesting stuff as well. It's very much a continue that Level 5 sort of sound, isn't it?
Yeah,
that kind of thing, but with more bonkers drums, basically.
Although I've enjoyed it, I think I feel like you, is that it would be nice to sort of see them do something.
What's the next thing
that is new and innovative? Because I remember that first one that we went to where
unbelievable.
It was Kevin and Stephen. You and I went to see it at the Hackney Empire, which has the most uncomfortable seats in the world. Particularly if you're big guy, like we all are.
Yeah,
But it was, in some ways, it was like attending a church service,
yeah.
because they walk on stage. Not a word is spoken to the audience. It starts off with the announcement over the
It's very
PA
funny.
saying,
Very funny.
you're not allowed to take photographs until the end. When Tony raises his camera, you can take as many photographs as you want. So they start with that, because Robert Fripp is famously averse to flash photography.
Which is,
Like,
it's his show.
he finds it distracting, I think.
If you want to be
So
part of it, you play by the rules, don't you?
then they walk on, and without saying a word to the audience, and they don't speak to anyone all night. In they go into Lark's Tongues and Aspic Part 1. They play for 2 hours and then walk off. And there's one lighting change, which is the one that you said earlier. Yeah.
It's I'm just glad they've done it, and I'm glad I've seen it, and I loved it, and I'm just really glad about. Like I say, it'd be hopefully they'll continue to move it forward. But I think Jeremy Stacey's a really good choice. I think he's a really cool drummer. I think because it was the Flash old boy, the Flash dude.
Gavin Harrison.
Gavin Harrison is an awesome drummer. He's really conceptual, and I think he comes up with those rhythmic innovations. I love Pat's drumming. I've always loved Pat's drumming. Patrick played drums on a track on my album. I love his playing. Jeremy Stacey's more of a groove drummer, same role as Bill Rieflin had as well, where it's really cool, just really not flash, but groove, really locking the groove down, which frees up Pat to do this, do the basically the Jamie Muir role, that sort of
exactly
percussionist role. Whereas Gavin Harrison is doing all the sort of flash stuff, the Neil Peart sort of type drumming. He's fantastic, he's a phenomenal drummer as well. And I think there's that 3 drummer thing is kind of remarkable, and and it must be nice for Robert Fripp to be able to sit at the back and be less of the focus of the gig as well.
Well, that's the other thing about it, is that for anyone who hasn't, if you don't know much about King Crimson and you're seeing this video from Fresh as it were, is that they organise the band in a very different way to the traditional way it's done. The 3 drummers are at the front, and then you've got a riser at the back with the other 5 members of the band on it, or the other 4 members of the band. It's quite novel, but it does work.
But I have to say, I'm just glad I got a chance to see them doing that stuff, and it was a bit like when I went to see Brian Wilson do Smile. It was just it's something I'd been so obsessed with when I was a teenager. To get a chance to see it was just, a remarkable thing. So I'm very glad I got a chance to see it. But overall, so David, what was your favourite King Crimson album?
So my favourite King Crimson album is Lark's Tongues and Aspic.
Cool.
And I think it's because, well, there's a number of reasons. One is it is just so out there, and there's nothing else quite like it. There's also, I think everyone's like this. It depends where you are at the time. I was 17. I was very impressionable. I hadn't heard any of this sort of music before. Here I was, sort of a melodic progressive rock fan, and I was suddenly being exposed to something completely new.
I mean,
so it was my way into all that.
Were you into Barclay James Harvest at the time then?
More sort of Genesis, yes. People like Barclay James Harvest to an extent. They're a band which for me have not worn terribly well. I have to say,
it's not my place to say, David. It's not aimed at me.
But no, it's more the sort of the Genesis, yes. Pink Floyd, Mike Oldfield, of course, is the guy that sort of got me into more rock based music. I love his early stuff.
So it must have been a bit of a shock when Lark's Tongues came in then.
Well, it was, because here's this double album, and I know what one of the records is going to be like. But you probably naturally assume that the other record is probably going to be similar.
And I think I think for me the first album of theirs that I bought and really loved was I think Red was the first one I bought, because I think that was the one. I think that is probably my favourite, although Thrak was the first one I bought as it came out.
Yeah,
that was about I was about 19, 20, so. I've been into Iron Maiden and Guns N' Roses, And my guitar teacher got me into the Mahavishnu Orchestra and Bill Bruford's solo stuff down in Holdsworth. And then I think I bought Red, and I may have bought Thrack within a few weeks of each other. And I
Yeah.
remember just thinking, this is the best. This is just brilliant. This is just, and I have to admit, at one point I was really, really, really into King Crimson, and I bought a lot of the downloads and stuff, and I think, like you say, I think I just love that attitude of just going, we're going to be brave, we're going to continue doing new stuff, and if Robert wants to have a bit of a lap of honour at the now and do the old tunes,
Oh yeah.
that makes him happy, and it's making a lot of people very, very happy,
And
including me.
I will go. I'll go along to see it, even if
Yeah,
it
me
is
too.
a
So,
sort of a heritage show. I'll still go and see it because
and,
I enjoy it.
it was, it was pretty amazing to see, and I just finished. When we did, we played it. Remember we played at Joe Kendall's birthday party
Yeah, when you played Starless.
in front of Jacko.
Yeah.
So it was Joe's birthday. Joe's a very good mate of mine. She's lovely. She's a really good friend of mine. And it was her birthday, and she booked us to play. And the thing was, we were all going to do a King Crimson cover. And so we said we'll do Starless. Not thinking a lot of it. I love that melody. Kev can sing it. It'll be fine. Looked out into the front row. Jacko from King Crimson staring right at me, and I was just, oh my god! I wish we rehearsed this a bit more. I mean, we did it all right. We got through it.
It was fine.
But it wasn't. It wasn't our. It's not our thing, as it were. We'd only had. We got through it, but it was a weird, very weird experience to me. I mean, I've had a few sort of time. Pat Maslow played drums on my solo album, one of the tracks on that, and then we played Stickmen. I got to be and talk to Tony Levin, who was lovely, and I've had a few. They were like a really big band for me when I was a kid, so to have any interaction with them at all was great. But that was scary. It was just like, oh my god, it's just it's we did it all right, but it was just. I just remember looking out into the audience, and I don't really get that nervous at gigs, especially not pub shows. Unless we're playing, we used to doing quite big shows and that, but I was frightened. I was proper frightened. But when we did the gig with Stickman, Pat Maslow tuned Stuart's drums for him. He helped Stuart, yeah, and Tony Levin said hi to our set. It was amazing. And isn't it lovely when you meet people who you've looked up to since you were a teenager, and they're just really nice people. I mean, isn't that cool?
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't met all the guys from the band, but I've done a sort of gig with Theo Travis, who was he's played with Robert and that, but
he was almost a member of King Crimson.
Almost a member of King Crimson, yeah. So that would have been, but that would have been interesting actually, because Theo's an awesome musician. But what was I going to say? Yeah, it's just bizarre, isn't it? That it's from being in the 90s, you wouldn't imagine they would still be going now. You know what I mean? I mean, how
and how much longer can they do it for? I guess because Fripp and Tony Levin and I don't know about the other, Mel Collins, they're all in their 70s now.
Whereas this would be the 51st or 52nd year.
Yeah,
which no one imagined rock bands would carry on for 50 years, did they?
Yeah, it's not rock and roll.
I remember people in the 90s saying that rock bands of the 70s, how can they still be going? But those guys are only in their 40s now, and you look at the lineup of any festival now, and most of the bands in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. Even every festival, we're living in a time where people can carry on. So I just hope they carry on for as long as they possibly can, and
as long as they're enjoying it, and as long as
they seem to be enjoying it, don't they? They seem to be a really good vibe about what they're doing, doesn't it?
That's one of the things that, again, this is from Sid Smith's book, is that Fripp saying this is the first time he's actually sort of been in a lineup of King Crimson, and basically it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, good on him. He deserves. I mean, it's nice to see the old boy happy, isn't it? So
yeah, absolutely.
And let's hope that they can keep going. And that all I'd say is how grateful I am for the music experience they've given me over the course, since I was a teenager to now. So
So yeah, absolutely
Yeah.
the same. Echo that sentiment.
Are we done?
I think we are probably.
Thank you for watching.
For this time. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to two blokes talk about King Crimson.
So misremembering, confused, talking about King Crimson. Ta-da! I'll stop recording.
Bye.